Because our destinies run together like two rivers that have met and can never be distinct again. At your every fatal turn, you'll find me.
No game series is created in isolation. Many take cues and inspiration from or build upon other series to create something new. Sometimes it could be as simple as a developer being told to chase a trend. Sometimes new developers bring their skills to a new workplace. Sometimes franchises build up and spin off into branching ideas. In this fashion, games can be highly related to other titles, have mixed heritage, and complicated family trees that unite many diverse franchises into interesting and sometimes unexpected lineages. Legacy of Kain is no exception to this cross-pollination of gaming. Series that are related to some degree include Dark Legions, Legend of Zelda, Gex, Akuji the Heartless, Shadow Man, Too Human, Eternal Darkness, Dead House Sonata, Sirens, Shakan the Forever Man, Devil May Cry, and Uncharted. But one series stands head and shoulders above the others as being the most closely related to Legacy of Kain. If we're talking family trees, she might be considered to be the slightly older sister who gets all of the attention. We're of course talking about the marketing behemoth that is Tomb Raider and Lara Croft, and the surprising amount of connections between the two series. In the early 90s, while developer Silicon Knights and publisher Crystal Dynamics were working on the concept that would become Blood Omen Legacy of Kain, across the Atlantic in England, a different proposal was being explored by developer Core Design and publisher Eidos Interactive that would go on to become the first Tomb Raider game. Both games were seeking to push the envelope on what could be done with the 5th generation video game consoles like the Sony PlayStation, and both were working on different ways to break the mould and provide things gamers had never seen before. In the autumn of 1996, both finally reached their releases within a few days of each other, with both proving to be somewhat unexpected hits with their own groundbreaking evolutions of video gaming. However, whereas Blood Omen was a surprise success, praised for its story, sound, characters and scope, Tomb Raider was another beast entirely, considered a runaway smash hit that largely redefined gaming of the era and birthed the 3D action-adventure genre as we know it. The complex legal situation surrounding Blood Omen's distribution, ports, publishing and cancelled sequel plans ultimately stalled development on further games for the Legacy of Kain series, while at the same time Eidos was pushing Tomb Raider developers Core Design to push out more games with yearly releases, somewhat against their wishes. So as the late 90s approached, Eidos and Core had released the critically acclaimed sequels Tomb Raider 2 and Tomb Raider 3, while Silicon Knights, Crystal Dynamics and others underwent legal battles over the fate of the Blood Omen series. The specifics are a story for another time, but when the dust settled, Crystal Dynamics retained ownership of the now Legacy of Kain series, had turned developer, and they now had a new publisher, Tomb Raider backer Eidos. Following this acquisition, Eidos slotted the two franchises into release patterns, and with the legal battles in the past, Crystal was free to continue to develop its Kain sequel, now called Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver, and this was the first true 3D action-adventure game of the series, no doubt inspired by the previous exploits of Ms. Croft. At the same time, Core was developing the 4th entry into the series, Tomb Raider 4, The Last Revelation. Both games were released in late 1999, and they were frequently compared in the gaming media. But where Core's yearly releases had caused a certain degree of developer and fandom fatigue, with trending downward scores, the fresh outlook, moody atmospheric design, and groundbreaking technical achievements of Soul Reaver made it another standout title and a high watermark in the evolution of 3D action-adventure gaming. Indeed, the words Super Tomb Raider can be found in relation to many contemporary reviews of the game. Aggressive releases continued, with both series moving forward. The fifth Tomb Raider game, Chronicles, followed a year later in 2000, to continuing downward trends. Meanwhile, Crystal was itself handed an 18-month turnaround on Soul Reaver 2. This resulted in a much leaner sequel, without much of the exploration, but with heavy story ties into the world of Nosgoth, that still sold and reviewed well when it was released in 2001. Dire omens were soon to follow for both franchises though. Save for some more modest handheld games on the Game Boy, Tomb Raider largely took time off in 2001 and 2002 to prepare for the long-awaited debut on the PS2, something the developers had been planning since Tomb Raider 1 had first released. And this meant more weight on the shoulders of Legacy of Kain. However, the release of Blood Omen 2, which had been in development for 3 years by that point, with little in the way of development resources, as much had been diverted to Soul Reaver 2, did little to improve the lot Eidos found themselves in, and review scores were considerably lower than expected. This left a lot to do for both franchises in 2003. So 2003 became a make or break year for both franchises, with both needing to come back with a bang after some unimpressive outings, and both franchises trying to find some new directions to turn things around. Tomb Raider Angel of Darkness marked Lara Croft's debut on the 6th generation of consoles, with a grittier edge including melee combat and stealth mechanics. But the game was widely panned as buggy and unfinished. However, it did sell relatively well for the time. Later in the year, Legacy of Kain Defiance was released, and it too took some risks, aping a Devil May Cry combat style, with much more confined areas, and some would say an awkward camera. However, it too underwhelmed. Critical reception was mixed to positive, actually comfortably beating that of Angel of Darkness and many of its predecessors. But it failed to impress in terms of sales, and this left Eidos with a lot to consider about the future of both franchises. And it was a struggle that only one franchise would survive. Sequels to both franchises were scrapped, and Eidos ultimately decided to shake things up and give control of the Tomb Raider franchise to Crystal Dynamics. Core were left without its main franchise, and despite attempts to make a 10th anniversary edition, they would never develop Tomb Raider again, and the studio was sold off to Rebellion soon after, completing only assistance on a handful of projects before being shut down at the end of the decade. Legacy of Kain, meanwhile, was laid to rest. The team that made the Legacy of Kain games, including the trio originally given custodianship of the series in the wake of the departure of Amy Hennig, was put to work on making the next Tomb Raider game. So the engine that had run Gex and the Legacy of Kain series, an engine that had been offered to Core years earlier to help them develop Tomb Raider, actually became the new engine for Tomb Raider, and it would go on to be used on Tomb Raider games for years to come. One notable absence, of course, was Amy Hennig, who had been in charge of the Legacy of Kain franchise since the days of Soul Reaver. She had been denied the reins of Tomb Raider, and so she left the company to go to work for Naughty Dog. In an act of supreme irony, her next game series would be the very Tomb Raider-like Uncharted series. Despite Amy often deliberately choosing to do un-Tomb Raider-like things to help distinguish the franchises, it often seemed that Tomb Raider was quick to follow those trends and took heavy inspiration from Uncharted. The Legacy of Kain influence continued through both Uncharted and Tomb Raider franchises, with some staff moving to follow Amy, and some of the Uncharted areas were referenced by Amy as being inspired by her work on Legacy of Kain, with areas such as the Treasure Vault being a continuation of the work she had begun on the Undercity cut from Legacy of Kain's Soul Reaver. One other wrinkle to the continuing story was also added in 2005 as SCI Entertainment acquired Eidos plc, the parent company of Eidos Interactive. The new entity, which confusingly enough would eventually be renamed as Eidos, no doubt gave business a boost and spurred on development for the next phase of Tomb Raider games. With the Legacy of Kain now undead, the Tomb Raider series moved on under Crystal Dynamics, and they began a new reboot of the series, kicking off with Tomb Raider Legend in 2006. And with so many Legacy of Kain refugees now working on Tomb Raider, this began the age of the Legacy of Kain Easter egg in Tomb Raider, with many games over the next few years containing multiple subtle references to the LAU series. Tomb Raider Legend kicked off the references with a number of subtle LAU references in its alternative costumes. The snowsuit had the Reaver skull symbol on its belt. The Goth outfit had a Razialim symbol on the jacket and a Kain symbol on the belt. The Goth lace outfit also had the Kain symbol on the belt. The sports outfit and its colour-swapped alternative sports green both had a number of subtle sound glyph symbols hidden throughout, one on the belt, one on the side of the trainers, and even one on the soles of the feet. In fact, this one even went a little further, with Tomb Raider and former Legacy of Kain artist Daniel Kabuko highlighting these symbols in a post which featured Lara in front of a stained glass window from the Soul Reaver Fireforge. That area had not been seen in Legend and was presumably either an unused placeholder or was completely cut from the game. The main story of Legend concentrated on the legendary sword Excalibur, which was fractured and reassembled later on, not unlike the Soul Reaver sword had been in Soul Reaver 2. Indeed, the parallels didn't stop there. Upon completion of the game, it was possible to wield the Soul Reaver in place of Lara's usual pistols, as the game had let you do already with the Excalibur blade. It was given the same attacks as Excalibur. Perhaps the most noticeable Easter egg was found in Lara's home, with the Croft Manor containing a portrait of the human Kain, as it appeared in Legacy of Kain Defiance. The portrait itself was drawn by artist Corey Heinzen, and was initially inspired by the real-world portrait of British colonial officer Frank Swettenham, by artist John Singer Sargent. During this time, another interesting oddball project that crossed the streams was the mobile title Lara Croft's Poker Party, a simple card game based upon Texas Hold'em poker. The twist here was that it consisted of Eidos video game characters competing in the stakes, with the elder Kain representing the Legacy of Kain series. A strange deal to be sure, and one not developed by Crystal, but perhaps worth noting nonetheless. As the team moved on, they next tackled their own remake of Tomb Raider 1, distinct from Core's cancelled Tomb Raider Anniversary Edition. This time, it would simply be titled Tomb Raider Anniversary, and would be a continuation of the Legend continuity. Anniversary released in 2007, and again the Legacy of Kain Easter eggs made an appearance, as Kain's human portrait reappeared in the Croft Manor. Later on, a double Raziel symbol, as seen on his cowl as a wraith, could be seen on the chest of the wetsuit costume, itself a reference to the solar diving suit seen in Tomb Raider 2. The final game in the trilogy was Tomb Raider Underworld, released in 2008. As had been the case with some of the earlier games in both series, it was initially developed at the same time as Anniversary, before being given sole focus later on. This time, there were less outright references to Legacy of Kain, and most were a case of similar themes and ideas. The most obvious direct reference was the return once again of Kain's human portrait in the Croft Manor, although this time it, along with the rest of the manor, was apparently burnt down in the opening level of the game. The other references generally had similar ideas to the Legacy of Kain, although usually played out in a much more straightforward manner. Lara travelled to several underworld locations, although they were literally depicted as sealed underground areas rather than an alternative plane of existence. Several enemies were similar to or based on the same mythological concepts as the LAU ones, including giant spiders, a giant squid or octopus-like kraken, and the undead zombie-like thrall enemies raised by the liquid Etia, which notably seemed very reminiscent of the Legacy of Kain thralls seen in Soul Reaver 2. A more heartbreaking touch occurred in the credits, with the dedication for Kyle, which referred to the tragic death of designer Kyle Mannerberg at age 29, around a year before the release of the game. His likeness was featured in Lara's yacht as an additional tribute. Kyle was one of 3 developers, along with Richard LeMarchand and Jennifer Fernandez, who were tasked with keeping the Legacy of Kain story alive after Amy Hennig's departure. LeMarchand joined Hennig at Naughty Dog in 2004. But Fernandez apparently dropped out of the industry around the time of Mannerberg's death. And many of the rest of the team that had made Legacy of Kain were now changing jobs and moving on. The age of Legacy of Kain had reached its end. After 2 positively received endeavours, Underworld ended up reviewing below expectations, and so it was decided again to reboot the franchise and move the series in a new direction, partially inspired by the Uncharted franchise. But this meant Tomb Raider again taking a break. At around the same time, Square Enix purchased Eidos, who they rebranded as Square Enix Europe, and they were keen to revive dormant franchises and push forward with other ideas. The seeds of a revival of Legacy of Kain were sown. At the same time, Crystal and other developers were approached about developing a new Legacy of Kain entry. But swayed by much lower price estimates, Square Enix awarded the pitch to Climax Studios, who at the time were best known for developing Silent Hill Origins and Silent Hill Shattered Memories. Crystal, meanwhile, pressed ahead with another, grittier, clean-slate reboot of the Tomb Raider series instead. While those projects were gestating, a different team within Crystal Dynamics had already started work on a different type of Tomb Raider experience to fill in the gap. That title went on to become the isometric cooperative action game Lara Croft and the Guardian of Light. DLC for that title included 2 character packs reviving characters from Eidos' dormant franchises, including Kain and Lynch, and with Legacy of Kain represented by the Raziel and Kain pack, with the characters fully playable for the first time in 7 years. The Raziel and Kain pack didn't actually record any new dialogue or story, but essentially inserted Raziel and Kain into Lara's adventure, and rearranged existing clips of the series' dialogue to create a humorous new storyline that made several references to the Legacy of Kain lore and jokingly referred to Nosgoth as another world and kind of in the past. The relative success of this excursion may have influenced Square Enix to press ahead with a strategy to target online multiplayer gaming for some of their less successful titles. Meanwhile, both LAK and Tomb Raider had new titles in development for a new era. But while Tomb Raider flourished at Crystal, Legacy of Kain floundered at Climax. And in the summer of 2012, while Tomb Raider's Survivor reboot was officially revealed, what had become known as Legacy of Kain Dead Son was quietly cancelled just before its E3 reveal. Tomb Raider released in 2013 to good critical reception and impressive sales, despite some reportedly over-exaggerated publisher expectations. Meanwhile, attempting to recoup some of the cost of Dead Son's development, Square Enix employed developer Psyonix to flesh out the multiplayer component of Dead Son into its own game titled Nosgoth, and pushed ahead with that as an open early access style development project, instead of the usual single-player story-based experience. Fan reaction was mixed at best, and while the critical reception was better, and the game did boost fan engagement, ultimately it did not capture the audience Square Enix was hoping for, and after 3 years of being playable, it shut down in 2016, just before it was due to be given its final release. In that time, the Tomb Raider franchise had released a sequel to Lara Croft and the Guardian of Light titled Temple of Osiris, and had expanded into mobile games. But it had also released the next main game in the series, Rise of the Tomb Raider, in 2015, to critical acclaim and impressive sales. This returned to the Legacy of Kain references, with the appearance of the Soul Reaver sword in the game embedded in a wall in the Tomb of the Prophet level. And later DLCs to the game added an endurance mode, along with feature cards named after Raziel and Kain, as well as a half-vampire card. Again, while Tomb Raider went from strength to strength, the Legacy of Kain series had somewhat lost the confidence of the publishers. Several pitches to revive the property were made, but all were discarded, and even when the series was placed on the indie developer pseudo-Kickstarter-style Square Enix Collective, none of the pitches received were deemed viable. So while Tomb Raider was handed over to Eidos Montreal to complete what would become the somewhat underwhelming Shadow of the Tomb Raider that finished off the Survivor trilogy in 2018, and Crystal had moved across to work on bigger fish with what would become the somewhat underwhelming Marvel's Avengers, the somewhat underwhelming reaction to Legacy of Kain had rendered the series dormant once again, and it was left to mobile game Tomb Raider Reloaded to continue the Legacy of Kain references with a subtle Raziel symbol in the intro. While Reloaded was being developed, another big publisher sale was registered, as the Embracer Group purchased many of the former Eidos IPs from Square Enix in 2022. Among these were both Tomb Raider and the Legacy of Kain, which were then placed under the auspices of Crystal Dynamics, who expanded back into publishing duties for the first time since the original Eidos sale in 1998. And with Tomb Raider and LAK positioned as the main properties under their umbrella, Crystal are currently assisting with the reboot of Perfect Dark, but plans are already underway for a unified reboot of Tomb Raider to bring it into the modern era. In a sign of the times, this new title will move to the Unreal game engine, as the old Gex engine was finally retired last year. That engine had forked and been refined numerous times over the years, known variously as the Gex engine, CDC, Crystal engine, Crystal Dynamics engine, and the Foundation engine. And ultimately, It had run most of the Crystal Dynamics games right up to the modern day, including Gex, Akuji, most of the Legacy of Kain series, the main Tomb Raider games, and even Marvel's Avengers. But what of Legacy of Kain? Crystal has quickly acknowledged the popularity of the franchise and the special place it holds in fans' hearts. And a survey gauging fan opinion about LAK resulted in 100,000 respondents, and an acknowledgement that fans' voices were being heard. Recent financial woes at Embracer could dampen enthusiasm, but it could also focus their attention. Interestingly enough, some of the loudest voices protesting against the LAK survey were from disenchanted Tomb Raider fans, dissatisfied with the direction the series had taken and the perceived loss of attention. But perhaps it doesn't have to be that way. It's a fresh start with both franchises positioned as Crystal's crown jewels. There may finally be a way for both to coexist, and for both sets of fans to be fulfilled. We can't say what the future holds, but whatever happens going forward, it looks like Lara Croft and Kain of Korhagen will be associated for some time to come. We hope you've enjoyed this new Developer Chronicles series. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and look out for more videos from the Legacy of Kain fandom and the Ancient's Den coming your way soon. So while Tomb Raider was handed over to Eidos Montreal to complete the somewhat underwhelming Shadow of the Tomb Raider, it's a fresh start. Why would you move now? As the Embracer Group purchased many of the former Eidos's.
They tricked us.
No, Eidos. And even when the series was placed on the indie developer placed on the indie developer pseudo Cookstarter. There's that Lara Croft cookbook again. Sorry, Ash. And even when the series was placed on the indie developer pseudo Cookstarter. Get your head out of the cookbook, man! By the way, God of War cookbook, really good muffins. Oh, I lost it.